No, I think the ideological bias and cultural bias in the West is deep rooted. That's why I said for decades your forecasts, your predictions about China turned out to be miserably wrong. Very poor record. I said to BBC reporter, I said, if I have to rate your magazine, rate your political judgment on China, rate your political comments on Chinese affairs, I will give a rating of C-.
And it's difficult to understand China if you're not curious or if you're judgmental. And by and large, Westerners are, not all of them, but are judgmental and don't know anything about China. So if someone starts, a political leader starts bad-mouthing China, criticising China and so on, then it'll have an effect, a negative effect. People are gullible because they don't know anything about it.
In these episodes, Zhang Weiwei, director of the China Institute of Fudan University in Shanghai, along with British scholar and political commentator Martin Yark, share their personal insights on political and cultural issues concerning China and the Western world, and look to bridge the gap and erase misunderstandings resulting from cultural and historical differences.
The key difference between Chinese Communist Party and a typical Western political party like the Labour or the Conservative Party in the UK, the key difference is they are what I call the partial interest parties, which means that this particular party represents part of their society, and they compete with each other and then hold the election. 51% will win. The Chinese tradition is very different. The CPC tradition is a tradition of what I call the holistic interest party. Let's use the term created by Abraham Lincoln, the American president. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. For the people, China is doing much, much better. This pandemic control is a good example. In China, it's safe. People's life is protected, but not in case of most Western countries, especially United States and UK. They're not doing well.
Classic example was during the pandemic. I mean, by and large, the Chinese reaction was close relationship between state and society. It was the social interest to act together. And if we had to do this or we had to do that, we must do that. Well, the party's so large, 90-odd million people, and it's clearly the backbone of the country, and it is essentially the kind of leader and mentor of the people.
China is the country that invented the civil servant examination system. That was in Sui Dynasty over 1,000 years ago. I've been practicing this in different forms, but basically you need to have a selection of the competent leaders for the country. So the Chinese practice is what I call the selection plus election. Selection plus election is better than election only. I call the lazyman's, lazy guys in the philosophy. Just label something authoritarian and democratic, then dismiss other models. I think it's very stupid, stupid to the extreme. The Chinese approach is we study very carefully, thoroughly, different models to see whether it's good or bad. Even if it's a bad model, whether there are elements which can be positive for China.
The use of the term authoritarianism to describe China is in a sense also to distract from the situation that's taking place in the West, because no longer can you be sure, the West can't be sure, of the future of its type of democracy. Meanwhile, the term authoritarian does not really describe China, because China is it reduces China to a sort of, a despotic hierarchy, if you like. And in reality, the reason why China's been transformed, and the people, you look at all the opinion polls and so on, are very satisfied, much more satisfied than the peoples are with their governments in the West, is because the Chinese Communist Party has succeeded in a transformative strategy for China, which has utterly has changed China in a very beneficial way for the people, in a very profound way. It's been the architect of China's transformation ever since 1949, and very, very successfully since 1978.
So I had a debate 10 years ago, this time, 10 years ago, with Professor Fukuyama, the author of The End of History. And he said at that time, China may experience Arab Spring because it was occurring at that time. I said no, China will not go through Arab Spring. And I predict the Arab Spring will become Arab Winter. Yeah, it turned out to be Arab Winter. And then he said that China need to have political reform, multi-party system, one person, one vote. I said both China and the United States need political reforms. The United States may need more urgent political reform than China, because the U.S. political system is a product of pre-industrial era.
The idea that essentially that China is not a consensual system, I think, is nonsense. It enjoys the support of the people. You don't have to have a Western democratic system
to represent the people.
No, or to be democratic in the sense that you represent the interests of the people. I mean, you can have a democratic system and it doesn't represent the people in any real. It doesn't advance the interests of the people. I mean, this is a very common phenomenon in the world. If you go to Latin American democracies and so on, by and large, they get elected, but they don't really work. And the problem in the West is, and the problem in the West is increasingly the same problem, that they don't really work in the way that they did. They work for a period, but they work from 1945 until, let's say, 1980, or even later than that. They work in the sense that the people were pretty happy about it, and economic growth was strong, and it was patently true that the West was the leader of the world during that period. But that's not the case anymore.
Indeed, socialism has long been associated, especially in the Western mainstream media, or even textbooks. Socialism has been associated with poverty. It's called equal but poor. Yeah. So when Deng Xiaoping came to power, his very first and most important remark is, socialism is not poverty. Socialism must be prosperity. So we have succeeded in producing a socialism with prosperity. As I said, China created the world's largest middle class. We have eradicated extreme poverty in China last year, full stop. Yeah. So this is remarkable. I always counsel my Western friends two important messages from China's success. One is the emancipation of the mind. In other words, you should have courage to embrace different models, different experience, different ideas, and to see whether they can work for you or not. For instance, when China doing so well with fighting the pandemic, yet very few Western media has the courage to report honestly how Chinese feel about their fight against the pandemic.
Basically, the Chinese are not boastful. They don't brag about their achievements. They're humble. Their reaction, not scholars, because they know more, but their reaction to the turn of America is puzzlement. I think. I mean, why do you have to do this? It's exactly the opposite to the American reaction.
I joked with a reporter from Economist. I said, now we can almost read your political comments in a reverse way. When you say China is not good this way, that way, which means it's very good this way, that way. So that's a problem with the West. Same with the problem with the BBC. I remember in the year 2012, just before the 18th CPC Congress, I was giving an interview with BBC. And the host asked me, do you think the CPC will have the 19th Party Congress, which means their presumption in 5 years the party will be over. So I said, my goodness, you have to understand China better. Virtually all your forecasts about China, political forecasts, over the past 2-3 decades, turn out to be miserably wrong.
As a result of a great deal of consultation, of course, with all the key sectors of society, because no one has that kind of intelligence, wherever they are, whoever they are. Yeah. It has to be a big, huge, nationwide process to get that right. Otherwise, you're going to get it wrong. But the 5-year plans, yes, have been extremely important. I mean, but the state has always been important in Chinese society. It's not just since 1949. I mean, one of the key characteristics of China's existence for millennia has been the importance of centralized government.
Centralized
in
a way that is different from probably any country in the world, actually.
So the West has to amend its way of understanding China and try to be objective, try to be impartial, get rid of this ideological stuff. Your system, democracy is a wonderful system, Chinese is a bad system, awful system. No, your system is in deep trouble.